This is the Sean Hannity Show podcast.
This counterterrorism campaign will be waged through a steady, relentless effort to take out ISIL wherever they exist using our air power and our support for partners' forces on the ground. This strategy of taking out terrorists who threaten us while supporting partners on the front lines is one that we have successfully pursued in Yemen and Somalia for years, and it is consistent with the approach I outlined earlier this year, to use force against anyone who threatens America's core interests.
It wasn't too long ago that the president was holding up Yemen as somewhat of a model for counterterrorism strategies in Iraq and Syria and in other places. I'm wondering, does the president still see Yemen as a model for success in fighting terrorism that can be applied elsewhere in the region?
Josh, the case that we have made is that Yemen did serve as a template for the kind of strategy that we would employ and have employed to mitigate the threat from extremists around the world. And in Yemen, the United States did on occasion take steps to remove some extremists from the battlefield. Those were steps that were carried out using U.S. capabilities, but they were done in coordination with a central government and with national security forces inside that country. Ultimately, our goal here is to build up the capacity of local countries so that they can assume responsibility for their own security situation. And that has both the effect of stabilizing the country so that extremists can't use it as a safe haven to plot and carry out attacks against the West.
Yemen and Somalia, two areas the president pointed as his great success in dealing with terrorism. Well, Yemen is in the process of disintegrating right before our very eyes. And more importantly, its geopolitical importance is on the line here, as you have regional rivals. Iran and Saudi Arabia now could potentially be on the verge of getting sucked into this mess that Obama helped to create. How bad is it? Joining us, Dr. Shoel Gubai is with us, a professor at the University of Denver and a Muslim world expert. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is back with us, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. And thank you both for being with us. How bad is it, Dr. Gubai?
It is very bad, and as it is in the Middle East, you have continuously shifting politics between the different constituencies. But I think the most important part, which is just going right to the case of the involvement of the United States, we have a very treacherous land and a direction, and it doesn't seem to be that we have a great driver in the driver's seat. So when we are looking at the internal and only the internal issues and supporting one side or another, as opposed to looking at the more macro perspective, which is what is the role of Iran, which is taking control not just in Yemen but in other countries as well, then we're making a very big mistake, which is a quintessential example of failure and not success.
What do you think, Dr. Jasser? You think this spirals out of control? Do other countries get sucked into this region and this battle?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, what's happening is we initially started with a whack-a-mole program where all we were doing was hitting the terrorists when they were military threats and had no ideological advancement. Now that whack-a-mole program is spiraling into a vacuum where you have Sunni and Shia jihadists battling each other, and Yemen is a prime example of that, where, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, the enemy of our enemy is our enemy, and yet we are emboldening them because of the nuclear talks and other issues, and yet the two comparisons that we learned the most of in the last week or two were the attacks in Tunisia and the attacks in Yemen. The attacks in Tunisia were done by ISIS because they wanted to weaken an economy of a state that actually had a secular party defeat the Islamists at the turn of the new year. So you had an existential threat to Islamists, both Sunni and Shia, that ISIS didn't want. Yemen is sort of the tip of the military threat because they want to fight the Shiites and create a dissolution of American allies and others and sort of create this Armageddon scenario where the whole Middle East implodes. And they're doing it because Obama really has no plan.
Let me ask this then. So now we've got the president pursuing these talks with Iran that would allow them nuclear weapons. All right, so what does that mean for the region? Does that create the arms race that the Prime Minister of Israel is warning about?
Absolutely. And if you look at what is actually the statements which are coming out today from Yemen, from Saudi Arabia, it is one direction, which is the involvement of Iran. If we are negotiating on one track and we're totally missing the more important issues of the hegemony of Iran and how it is working in Lebanon, in Syria, and now in Yemen and other places through Hezbollah, then basically we're missing the boat, and we are in a situation where we're taking a risk that could change the whole structure, not just of the Middle East, but also of the world. If Iran is doing all that it is doing, for example, is at the moment that the Sana is being captured by the Houthis, is sending airplanes with military equipment, with soldiers, is doing it in the auspices of now, when they don't have the nuclear capability. Imagine what happens when they do.
Don't you agree with that, Dr. Jasser? I mean, for all the criticism, this is what I don't understand about the president. You know, he rips Bibi's rhetoric, but over the weekend, we heard repeatedly these chants, death to America, by the head mullahs in Iran. Why isn't he out there condemning that? He's sitting at the table telling Americans that we're close to a deal with the people chanting death to us. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. It's disgusting, and it's, if we haven't learned anything from World War II is that we need to read the Mein Kampfs of our enemies. And the Mein Kampfs, they're saying what they want. They're saying they're genocidal against Israel and against us, and they want to destroy us, and they're bonding with the terror groups of Hezbollah. In Syria, Iran has fueled the genocide there against the Sunnis because they want to create the Shiite crescent, and in response, we're allowing ISIS to create a responsive crescent, and Saudi to want to arm themselves, and because of a vacuum of any plan, I mean, nature abhors a vacuum, and it's going to be filled by militants unless we have a plan. And, at the time of Reagan, we had a president who identified what the evil empire is. The evil empire of today is all Islamic states, the OIC. And no matter how permutation evolves of those countries, they are going to be a threat. And there are nascent moderate groups that could be fueled with a vision of moderation, of liberty, a liberty doctrine, if you will. And the president, by virtue of being absent, is allowing the most evil to rise, and you're creating a sectarian division in the Middle East.
I've noticed that the left in this country has made a comparison. Well, Reagan negotiated with the Soviets. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. This president is negotiating to allow the Iranians to get nuclear weapons. There's quite a distinction here.
Absolutely, Sean. This is a big, big difference. And when we already see the escalation of the attempts to get the nuclear capability, not just by Iran, because if it starts there and people around in the Middle East, the particular regimes, do not believe that this is going to a situation where Iran will not possess weapons of mass destruction as nuclear capability, of course, their interest is as well to try and reach the same point, and then basically the whole thing escalates to a situation where unprecedented reality in the world altogether. Even when you look at the locale, let's say that the Houthis do succeed in getting strongholds in the south of Yemen. That's the Bab el-Mandeb, the Straits, which is basically only 20 miles wide. That already jeopardizes the possibility of different routes towards Israel, towards Jordan, even towards Egypt, and that's why we're seeing that the local regimes are very nervous. And the last time that Saudi Arabia was nervous was when we had the situation in Bahrain, where it actually and actively used force there, and this is sounding like it's going to get to the second stage where Saudi Arabia may use even force, and we'll have to see how the talks go along today. But this escalation is definitely not in our interest, and it seems to be like we really don't know what we're doing there.
Dr. Goodbye. Dr. Jasser, thank you both for being with us. Appreciate your insight and contribution here.